show you, here's the dictionary we worked on. There's another, here's for instance the National Defense Strategy. You see, literally every other party has a different definition of national defense strategy. This is a tool we've developed for the mapping of their positions during the negotiations. So this is on defense policy and strategy. So there's Lebanese forces, a pro-American group. There's Hezbollah, Free Patriotic Movement, which is with Hezbollah. So each one have their positions, and they input the positions themselves, and we also input the positions with them.
What is the column on the right, common ground? That's places of identified current sort of overlap in their perspectives on things?
So on this side of the tool, there's common ground, the differences, and then generating of options, and then the single text draft that we've implemented in this virtual shared process. The elements that you have in the, just before I interrupt myself again, there's various complementary graphics that we also constantly use for the dialogue. This is the security and defense dialogue. They have the same for the Lebanese-Palestinian dialogue. For instance, this one. And you see here the tool is already, all the positions are in Arabic. So you have the same in Arabic. With, we also add some pictures and strategic maps of where people are at. And, so whatever they need for their negotiations and whatever reports they've all produced with each other, all of that goes into the same place. The documentation, the reports, the books, we digitize these things and go into the same place. Photographs, maps. So every single one of the parties have exactly the same information on an ongoing basis. So where I showed you the common knowledge part is a shared library, a physical shared library. Each party had their books there, each confession had their books there, and each one of the thematic areas they're working on there, the resources are also in there. And then you have the virtual spaces and the ongoing research that they are doing collectively on various research work. The other element of the dialogue happens in many different ways. Formal dialogue, non-formal dialogue, bilateral dialogues, and inside a physical space. So we created a physical space in Lebanon where they are meeting right across from Parliament, actually. I'll show you briefly what that looks like. So there's a physical space right in the middle of Beirut that you see there, right across from Parliament. And so in that space right across from the Parliament, Parliament is over here, and their common space is over there. So the access of people and also the interaction is constant. So you created a dynamic where you have a constant ongoing process. There's some pictures before during the war, what it looked like. And so from our one side of our window, we look at the Christian Orthodox Church and the Christian Armenian Church and the big Hariri Mosque. And then on the other side, we look at Parliament. So we created both in terms of pictures and in office spaces, elements for them to be able to work together on these different issues. I think what I will do, I know it's going to sound if I stop right here, if I stop in the middle, but I want to just conclude with saying that I think what I've seen in the Lebanese process right now is, it's definitely one of the most difficult processes I've worked in. And I really didn't know if I could see the end of the tunnel there. And I'm not sure if I see the end of the tunnel. I don't think that's the purpose who will help anybody. But I'm hopeful, and I think that's the most we can have in a process like this. To be hopeful when relationships are starting to reach out and people are willing to work together. In the common space, the focus is not meeting agreements. It's meeting common understanding. And many of the other spaces that we worked on is to push towards an agreement. But here you have many formal processes whose purpose is to reach an agreement. And in many cases, you already have an agreement. So the space that you've created here between the government, the parliament, and the national dialogue is a common space of trying to reach common understanding and working towards that common understanding together. And many of them are, at that level where they're also drafting, are people who eventually will draft agreements jointly. We've seen that in the Nepali process, where many of the people who joined the Nepal common process were eventually the people who drafted most of the Nepali, the peace agreement, the interim constitution, and most of their agreements came out of that group. Because of the relationships with each other, because of knowing each other very well, but also in Nepal, the process went as far where each party appointed a full-time researcher in a common space where the researchers were working together in producing material for their own parties, but also collectively material for the dialogue, which was a really fascinating evolution of that process. In this case, we're not there yet. What we've done, because you have such a rich academic environment, is looking at the different think tanks and research centers working together with each other. So not inside this space, but then working together, either universities or think tanks or organizations working together there. Lastly, I want to say, I think, if you speak to most people, I saw most recently the 1701 report on that was submitted to the Security Council, which will probably be released in the next few weeks. I found it extraordinarily challenging that I think on one hand we're doing a horrible job for us inside dialogues, but also concerning, because if you look at some of these processes, there are so many positive elements it's not exactly how we would like to design it. If you look at the Lebanese process, the design we had for it was completely different. After the consultations with them and working with them for almost a year, the design there was completely different from what you see today. But what you see in the critics and the analysis was shooting down the Lebanese process at the moment. But if you want to look at really where they've made progress, of the issues that they've already agreed on the root causes, to let them go back into the official constitutional mechanisms and jointly get them implemented, is a major progress. I think it's an extraordinary progress. But that requires that you look at the dialogue in its full thing and not just what is on one table. In that sense, I think Lebanon has made an extraordinary progress in dealing both with their root cause issues and with a very delicate issue of the relationship of the resistance with the state, which, if you can resolve some of the root cause issues, the arms issue will become less and less important. It's not an issue we're going to resolve at the end of this year. It's probably an issue you're not going to resolve in 5 years' time, but it will be an issue. I mean, if you look at the Israel-Palestine issue, it's interrelated. It's all interrelated here. It will go for a long journey still forward. Thank you for listening. I hope I made some sense, and looking forward if you have any questions.
Thank you, Johannes. We told everybody we would wind up at about 1:30, so that gives us about 15 minutes for questions. I know people have already asked a few, but would anybody like to go ahead?
Right at the front end, Johannes, you said that there were a few vertical connections. So in some of the processes, and I'm wondering, you had civil society on one of the maps, one of the graphics, but what is the relationship of civil society or or any other vertical processes, either within the constituencies that people represent at the table, because presumably they represent somebody and there may be some communication process, or other ways that other groups outside of the official dialogues or official processes engage deeper in society.
What
In the Lebanese case.
Yeah, in the common space process, which is designed so the people directly in your constitutional elements and the national dialogue is involved in these processes, or they're people close to them involved in here. You have the circles that you see, the dotted circles around, what they call expert groups and partners. Leading partners, which is usually a ministry or a parliamentary committee, or an official body, which they call the leading partners. And then resource partners and mobilization partners are mostly civil society, academia, and think tanks. So in terms of the process guide, the committees that brought together to guide the process, each one of these processes is primarily civil society. That those people are primarily drawn from either advisors to people inside the constitutional process and with civil society, academia, think tanks, other civil society organizations, and religious bodies, business, and so forth. So the element that you hear, these thematic expert groups are primarily civil society in the different forms. And the inside dialogue groups, as you will know, formal dialogues, are your concerned parties and institutions, but also civil society. Like in this model, we did not exclude, it didn't become just political parties. That the stakeholders, I think we had a bit of a problem with a normal definition of stakeholders in Arabic. Because a stakeholder means a certain level of ownership, which they felt went further than what they meant by ownership. So in Lebanon, we're not calling them stakeholders, we call them concerned parties. So concerned parties are more than stakeholders, but less than they own alone. So that's sort of the frame that you have involved there. I don't know if I'm answering, but so at this level, each of these committees and processes feeds then into the national dialogue, parliament and government. Like for instance, they're signing a social pact at the moment. The cabinet has asked for a social pact, and the entire social pact was done inside the common space. The whole process on the legislative process on developing legislation for decentralization also done inside the common space. So the consultations in the regions, consultations with most local municipalities, with civil society and different sectors, that's what the common space is managing and bringing them all together.